one of my friends told me I need some kind of intro, like some kind of intro music and like ending music, but like I don't know where to get that. So I guess welcome to CoalitionM, everybody. My name is Carson Lopez. I'll be your host tonight, and you're listening to KFHS Radio. I have with me tonight. Would you like to introduce yourself, or would you like me to introduce you?
I mean, I'm already here. So my name is Eli, currently Jarnot. I'm getting my name legally changed. So in a month or two, it's going to be Eli Barzeski.
Eli Barzeski. Cool. How long until you finally get that officially done?
So
skis.
Recently got a new job, and part of the process, because I have the court order all already figured out.
Okay.
Went to court, got the thing signed. When you turn in your social security card, you then like turn in your photo ID, so like your license, your birth certificate. So then it's kind of like during that time frame, you like don't have any ID. So, and like usually when you get hired at jobs, they require like, we need to scan in your photo ID and stuff like that.
ID, yeah.
So probably like definitely over the summer, because then my moment of job transition will be done. So then I can go back to like personal transition.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I hope that they speed it up for you in that regards.
Yeah.
So
it's been a long time coming.
Good. Well, I'm glad that you get to do that and that you get to call yourself officially what you like very, very soon. That's very cool. So, Eli, how have you been?
Oh, I mean, I've been good. Again, like just with like the job transition lately, just kind of like trying to challenge myself, not always be stuck doing the same thing, seeing what the next step in my life is.
Yeah, for sure.
But things are now falling into place. Like I also got a new apartment. Actually, I signed the lease today.
Oh, good. Well, congratulations.
Deposit.
Very cool.
So moving to an actual like house, still renting it,
Woo-hoo!
but like going from an apartment to a house. So like we're moving up in the world.
Awesome. Cool. Are you still living with TJ?
Yeah, I'm still living with TJ.
Cool.
And then Drew is being my third roommate. You might have known. He works at the
I know
desk.
Drew. Yeah. Ginger.
Yeah.
So cute.
Both of them. I know.
Yes.
Do you know
both
Drew's girlfriend? She's
Hannah.
also cute. So
Hannah. Yeah. She was my resident last year. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know Hannah. Yeah.
They're all
both
great
of
people.
them are super cute. Yes, indeed. I hope they listen to this and are like super embarrassed. Anyway, so I have brought my friend Eli on tonight, basically to just talk. Eli is, and I'll let you get into this more too. So Eli is very much a mental health activist, LGBT activist, has, a lot to say on behalf of both of those things, even combined. And I wanted to make sure that you got to speak a little bit on that. And also I want to talk a little bit about social media. This has been a topic that's been recurring in my episodes lately when I have people on and we talk about, because I think there's a lot to say about social media, because I think it's its own world at this point. I think that it's got its own culture, its own like subculture, that is this platform that is the internet. And so I really want to delve into that with you and talk about, things that people are sharing nowadays that, 10 years ago, 12 years ago when Facebook was just becoming a thing, this would have been unheard of. Nobody saw this coming. At least I hope not. That would be terrible if someone saw this coming and then didn't do anything about it. But no, I think the social media's got some really great qualities and some really bad qualities, but I think that those bad qualities are starting to yield some consequentially good things. I'll go more into that later. But Eli, talk to me about man, I don't know what to start with.
Yeah, I know there's a lot to start with.
Why don't you just tell me about yourself, or what is something that you want to talk about? I'll let you start that off.
So I guess since to keep us kind of like on topic, because there's a lot I could say about myself, but in terms of like the
mental
health activism kind of thing, how that kind of started. is so I have PTSD, and it's not through like military service. It was from a domestic occurrence. It was through sexual assault, rape, through multiple men, and for the longest time I just like kept it inside. I didn't talk about it, and so then the PTSD started to develop from that. And it did get to a point, at first I never saw myself actually being so open about it and talking about it with people and like being an advocate for it. At first, I just kind of started really diving into it and like trying to figure it out just for my own sake, because I was like waking up from nightmares, like it was, you know, getting in the way of my personal life. And then you do kind of realize how personal bleeds into professional, how personal bleeds into like community aspects and stuff like that. And then whether it was like in the workplace, whether it was in classrooms, whether it was just like with my friendships or relationships with other people, it just kind of made me think there's just a lot that people aren't aware of. And you hear it a lot, not just like with PTSD, but like with depression, with anxiety. Going like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, mental health was just kind of a stigma where like people didn't want to talk about it because it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. You know, you have to be vulnerable. And through my life, I've just kind of realized I have no problem with public speaking. And I thought, I have this voice. I actually have, you know, some personal experience, as well as, because it's not just with personal experience. In my free time, I will read like mental health articles, learn about like treatments for PTSD. Like recently, within the last 2-3 years, a country in Europe, it's either Sweden or Switzerland. I remember there was an SW in it, but they recently got approved to like start using LSD and controlled dosages like help through PTSD. So if I can help like raise awareness or something and like facilitate those kind of difficult questions, then I'm gonna do it, you know?
Yeah, I'm gonna do it. Good. Well, could you talk to me a little bit about, if you're comfortable talking about this, of course. So a lot of times when we're having these conversations about things like sexual assault or harassment, something like that, it's usually typically in terms of women and what they're experiencing. So can you speak a little bit to what, not necessarily what the difference is just because you're a man, but just have you experienced any kind of like, I don't know, eyebrow raises because of the fact that you're a man and that you will talk about being sexually assaulted, you know?
Yeah, I think it's not only is it because I'm a man, but I'm also identify as a gay man. So then it just kind of like blurs the lines a little bit more.
Okay. What do you mean?
Because it's like in America, we do have like this toxic masculinity kind of issue, and to where, you know, as a man, I should have been stronger. I should have been able to like fend off the other person. And then also, even if it did happen, I should be able to just like not get like let it have such an emotional effect on me. You know, just like you know, just man up, like kind of get over it kind of thing. And then even just like being able to talk about it, because growing up, it was just like, are you bleeding? Like if I try to talk to my dad about anything that ever happened, it's like, well, like, are you bleeding right now? Like, do you need to go to the hospital right now? And I'm like, well, no. And it's like, well, then you're fine. So it's just like, okay, cool. But no, I think as an adult now and kind of talking about it, I now kind of get the impression too, it's almost a little bit back burner, simply because like in terms of the demographics, most of it for like victims of like sexual assault, sexual violence and stuff like that is with women. And so a lot of the resources go out to providing shelters for women and stuff like that, while men are seen more so as like the predators.
You're right.
So it's kind of, in terms of overall resources, there's just not as much made available to us, which is like it's fine and it's not, because my thing is like I don't ever want to take away resources or take away from the voice of, you know, female victims and stuff like that. I just wish to like add to that. Like, let's focus on what happens with women as well as men, not to like separate, but just to bring together.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up, because I was just thinking, you know, there's got to be, we know there are less resources out there for men in terms of homelessness, in terms of assault, in terms of harassment, and just general, you know, counseling. Not that it's not there for counseling in particular, but it's just, you know, I've heard people say, oh, that's chick stuff, you know, and so there's really not a whole lot of voice for the men out there who do need these things, because they're human beings like the rest of us, and of course they need help even if they haven't gone through something terribly traumatic. And so I find that to be just a really sad part of our society, that it's not recognized, and that men are held to this impossible standard of man up, if you're not bleeding you're fine, you know. It's just ridiculous. But I do hope that, you know, when you mention you don't want to take away from women's resources, and I hope that people like you and me and people we know will keep pushing, so that it's not that we're taking away from somebody else to get what you need and what other men need. It's just adding more resources for everybody.
Right.
So that it's more inclusive, and so that way, when you are including men and their experiences too, you know more about the issue. You know, when women start talking about, you know, experience with abuse or being in a domestic relationship that's violent, we know more about those relationships then. Like, we know red flags, you know, we know what to look for. We know what to look for in a friend if it's happening to her, and things like that. And so I know that once men start being taken seriously in that aspect, we're going to know more about it. We're going to know more about the situations. We're going to know more about how it affects the person. We're going to know more about how to help victims of violence of any kind like that. And we'll know more about the people who commit these acts so that they can get help, you know. But it's just sad that that's kind of ignored. That half of society that still feels that is just kind of, that's almost more uncomfortable, I think, for people to talk about than the fact that women experience this. You know, I asked when they were doing the Me Too hashtag, I remember asking my mom, have you ever experienced harassment of any kind like that? And her response was, well, of course I have, and I'm an American woman. Like, of course I've experienced that. And I'm just, that is so shitty, insane. And I honestly really didn't see any men participating in that. And that doesn't mean they weren't. It's just that I didn't see it. But, you know, I hope that we can keep pushing toward a society that's willing to listen to that side of things. Yeah. You know?
And I think, like, with the Me Too movement, it was, and again, because I've actually had this conversation with some other people, actually it was probably a week ago, about how during the Me Too movement, they did kind of put a lot of focus and emphasis on, you know, the female victims and stuff like that. And, like, you heard it in Hollywood, how, like, a lot of these, like, big name figures were being called out, which is fine. If they are doing it, then call them out for it. Like, go for it. But the fact of, like, it did feel at times a little bit exclusionary, where it was just like, we are going to listen to the female's voice on this right now. And yet when there were, like, possible instances where, like, a male voice could have been featured, it was kind of put to back burner, which in my eyes is kind of like, it could have been so easy though to just had, like, equal platform for both, as opposed to just, like, focusing on one side, one demographic. And I think that's another, it's that issue of when you bring it up, because then people kind of think like, oh, so you wanted to take away the spotlight from someone else. And that's, you know, what I try to get across. It's like, I don't want to take anything away from everyone.
Right.
I just want there to be like, there's different ways to work around getting both voices to be heard.
Absolutely.
And I think too, because men will handle things a little differently. Like there's different cultures between like how men handle things and how women will handle things.
Yeah.
And sometimes people might not have like a direct solution, and they think like, well, okay, you want this platform, what is your solution to it? And some people may say like, well, we don't really have one quite yet, but we just want a backboard to like bounce things off of. We just like open a panel so that conversation can happen. Because one thing I think is so like wild and crazy is like on Facebook and social media, I'll hear these stories about if girls are at a gym or if they're in a bar and they see another girl that's like potentially being harassed or something like that, they won't even know the woman, and they'll go over and be like, oh, hey, girlfriend, like, what's going on? Like, I need to go to the restroom. Do you want to come with? Or like, hey, like, are you almost, if it's like at a gym, it's like, hey, I'm almost done with my workout. Are you almost done? And it's like, there's this unspoken rule of like, you can just, that like camaraderie, just be like, hey, it's easy for me to interject into this, which is something amazing. And it's like, I mean, it kind of sucks that like it's gone to that point where
everybody
have to
knows
have,
it.
that thing happen. But like if it's two guys and like one guy is potentially being, harassed or in an abusive relationship or something, what are the other guys going to do? Because there is that mentality of just like, oh, I'm too manly, like I don't want to deal with it, or I just want to have some beers and like not even talk about feelings. But like if we had a platform, if we had enough discussions where bros could go up to bros and be like, oh, hey, like, do you want to like watch the game or some shit like that, or like talk about sports, or find like the male alternative, I guess, to kind of like what women would do in that situation.
Yeah, when you were talking about that, the difference between what women will do for each other and what men will do for each other in those situations, I know someone personally who it's just who she is. She will see another woman in danger and she doesn't care. She will just go for it. And she's amazing for that. And when you were talking about what are men going to do about it? Do you remember that commercial where these guys are sitting in a trailer and a bear starts attacking them, and all the guys but one are ignoring it? And the one guy is like, are we seriously not going to talk about the fact that there is a bear that's trying to get into our trailer? And that advertisement, that commercial, was for sexual assault awareness, trying to talk about the fact that it happens and stop ignoring it. I thought that was brilliant to turn sexual assault into the bear that's attacking your home, and you're just ignoring it. I think that's a brilliant way to emphasize how important it is to recognize it. But also, I was also thinking, it's usually like with you ever see those commercials on the movie channel where it's like, no more she was drunk, he was drunk, no more excuses, there's only one thing that I need before having sex, and that's consent from her. It is generally more protective toward women. I mean, it just is. I've never seen a commercial where a bunch of women are sitting around talking about how they need to protect their boyfriends from being drugged, or their friends who are men from being harassed by women or other men. And I'm not saying those commercials aren't helpful in general to just raise awareness that, these things do happen and you do need to look out for people. But it is just, do you feel like there's that exclusivity, and I feel like it's there too in actual communities like the Me Too that we were just talking about, where it's kind of like, well, you're a dude and you couldn't possibly understand. Do you feel that kind of pushing away the men who have also experienced these things on social media and in these social groups, and it's just kind of like, you're not allowed to be a man and have these feelings and have these experiences, but if you do, shut up for a second because we still need to talk about it. Like, you can't be included. Like, wait till it's your turn. You know what I mean? Do you feel any of that? Is that real to you?
And I think before I was like as vocal as I am now about it, I think it was like a little bit harder to like find that platform, find where, you know, I felt comfortable or like felt welcome enough, and that people, you know, were hearing me out and, you know, giving it its due respect, you know. Now I'm kind of vocal about it, and to put it bluntly, if I don't have a platform, I'll just make my own platform and, you know, say what needs to be said. I will say, especially within the past like 2 years, it has gotten better. I do feel like, I just want to, you know, keep that momentum going, you know, kind of thing, because there's still other conversations that we could be having, in terms of, you know, talking about like the prevention, you know, for on the female side, like, okay, what can you do to make sure you don't get raped? Make sure you trust the guy, like, don't let them root for you, you know, make sure you have consent. But a thing that, a like cultural thing that we kind of don't talk about is, if there's a group of guys, it's a whole thing like, oh man, like, I would never let you date my sister. You know, it's kind of like the golden rule of like, you know, all your friends can't date your sister. And if you break it down in the construct, it's just like, why would you be friends with someone that you wouldn't be okay with dating your sister, right? Like, if you're going to be like such close friends with someone, like, you would assume that you respect them a lot and you think like, hey, they're a genuine dude. But if you're like with your best man and you're like, I would never want you to date my sister, what does that tell you about the guy that you're like being best friends with and stuff? And so trying to like, and because that's another side that does play into the rape culture, that plays into the toxic masculinity, that isn't quite as talked about too much. You know, what are we going to do with that conversation? I'm not quite so sure yet, but I would like to at least be able to have that conversation, have like platforms like this where it's a radio show where we can actually bounce ideas, you know, back and forth and raise awareness to make people think.
Do you get called snowflake a lot? Because you want to talk about your feelings?
Personally, I've never been called a snowflake. No one's actually like come up to me and said it. But I mean, probably people out there may think that I'm a snowflake. I don't know. I feel like people that kind of gear more towards like the liberal side probably get called snowflake a bit more. Sure. And I kind of consider myself probably actually more moderate, because there are some issues like when it comes to like mental health and the LGBTQ community, I am probably like leaning more towards the liberal side. Yeah. But then also on my Facebook, there's other things in terms of like with welfare and sometimes like with immigration, I like surprise some friends with some more conservative views. So I feel like I kind of blend in a little bit.
So that's great. I love that. That's something that I've been talking to people about more, especially in this format too, is the problem with the left, essentially, and how far it's going and how far it's gone so far. So why don't you give me some examples of some like more moderate or conservative viewpoints of yours that do you get a chance to express these to people often?
I mean, sometimes. Okay. I think like when I do say that I'm moderate, it is because I will go out of my way to make sure that on my Facebook page and like through my friends that I'll have people on like both sides. I'll have very strong conservative friends that will like post a lot of these articles from like stereotypically very conservative sites, and the same thing with the left side as well, because I think it's important to just like inform yourself on, you know, both sides, because both sides are valid. And I think a lot of times we are almost pushed into this like either you're right or you're wrong. It's either my way or the highway, when a lot of times you can find a middle ground. And people will bring up like, oh, we can't do a middle ground because of like either budget cuts or, you know, these other obligations. But I think a lot of it is more so just a pride issue, because if someone's like, well, you know, if I'm a little bit wrong, they can't even admit that. They're like, I have to be either completely right on everything or completely wrong. And I'm like, no, like, because sometimes I'll bring up, like, there's an article I've read, like with it was actually recently, well, not recently, it was like 2 weeks ago. I had read 2 articles that said something that like Trump had tweeted that we were now going to war with North Korea or Syria, one of those, that he had like tweeted, we are going to war, and how like Congress was now going back on it and be like, you can't do that. And I had read it, you know, from some articles, so I brought up some friends, and I was just like, did you hear this? Like, is this real? Like, what is going on? And they said like, no, Eli, like, that didn't actually happen. That's not true. And, you know, there was that point of just like, wow, I just look like an idiot, because I was all fired up. I was like, we're going to talk about this. Why are we at war right now? Like, what is happening? And they're like, no, Eli, that did not happen. So, you know, it's an awkward moment. I was like, oh, well, I'm an idiot. I'm going to go be quiet for a couple seconds now. But like, I think that is a lot of a fear that people have, is like they don't want to be wrong, but like being wrong doesn't equate you're a bad person. Yeah. And like to be uncomfortable is for personal growth. So
yeah, you are speaking my language, Eli, truly. I'd like to add to that just because you end up being wrong in a situation about something that didn't really happen and you thought happened, or something that you think is the right way to go about it, and then someone convinces you that actually there's a better way to go about it, I think being wrong doesn't mean that you're an idiot. And it doesn't necessarily mean either that the other person's right, because you could both very well be wrong. You know, it just means that you were wrong. That's all it means. And I understand the fear of embarrassing ourselves, especially in front of or even to someone we disagree with, because then that threatens who you are for some reason. It feels like if I'm talking to, I don't know, a Christian about the Bible or something, and they help me realize something that I've been looking at wrong, it feels like a threat to my atheism, but it's truly not. It's really just more helpful than anything when somebody can open me up to looking at a certain way. It makes me a better thinker in the future, you know? And so I think that social media in particular has played a very detrimental role to people's egos. And I don't mean as in like it hurts their egos. I think it inflates the ego and makes it harder on the person to deal with when they are wrong and they know that they're wrong. I mean, I've sat someone down here before and we were on the same side. I mean, we are both liberal, but I mean, I got eye rolls from this person. I got into an argument with this person over really nothing. It wasn't even important to the whole subject we were talking about. It was something real little, Eli, that this person could not get over. And it was more about being right, I feel like, than it was about just progressing in the conversation. And I think that a lot of that comes from social media. Do you agree with that? Do you think that?
I think, like, depending on the social media platform, because I've heard how Twitter is probably one of like the most positive social media platforms, and Facebook is the most negative.
Really?
And I think it's because in Facebook, it is easier to kind of like put yourself in a like small circle or like in a kind of comfort zone. Like it's easier to negate negative views, or if like people you don't like, you can block them. You can change like some preference settings on like in terms of like ads or like what you want to see. While with Twitter, if you start hashtagging something, like it's just a whole other spectrum that they're playing there. And so it's a little bit harder, I feel like, to keep yourself in like this bubble where everything comforts you, as opposed to Twitter. But like with Twitter, because it's so open, you open yourself, you can, to a lot of like negative feedback, but you also open yourself up to a lot of positive. You're just like more open. You have more stimuli, I guess, in a way. While Facebook, once you've like established yourself in a certain way, like blocked, these certain people, your newsfeed becomes this like constant, like self-feeding monster kind of in a way, which is why I'll make an effort. Like I have people, that are friends on Facebook. Are all of them legitimately friends? Are all of them people out like, hey, like I'll definitely go to the bar, grab a drink with you? Probably not. I kind of do see it as though like I have actually met this person though. Like I have had an interaction with them, and whether sometimes, they're pretty chill, they just post funny memes, irrelevant things, or they will be posting like conservative, liberal, moderate, political articles and stuff like that. So I just kind of use it as a way to get me out of my comfort zone, to make sure that I'm not just gonna stay stagnant, stay in the same mindset. Constantly learn, stay active, especially like during elections and stuff like that. Like it's strong to vote, so inform yourself on the issues. See like all sides of it. So.
Right. Yeah. How do you decide what you're gonna put out there, whether it's on? Do you have a different logic with that when it comes to Twitter versus Facebook, or is it kind of the same deal for you?
I think it's generally the same. I now, like, if I'm gonna be like posting about whether it's like mental health or something in the LGBTQ community, I have noticed recently I make it a little bit less personal, and instead of saying like, hey, this is something that like I was going through, we should talk about this. If I see an article that like I relate to or something, I'm like, oh hey, like this is, I think, something that people should be aware. Or if like I heard something in the news, I try to keep it more grander scale, I guess. So that way it's not just like, oh, Eli's talking about himself again kind of thing. Because that can also, like, even if it is just Facebook and like I can choose who sees it, who doesn't, because like it's generally like if they're on my friend's feed, I know who they're like gonna see. But it is still like that like personal vulnerability, and I don't really want people to get caught up on their personal relationship with me, because it's like if they, for whatever reason, didn't like me as a person, because I am kind of aggressive sometimes, I don't want my message to get lost in that. So I think when I post, I do try to, I don't want to say like a neutral kind of like viewpoint towards it, but I do try to stick with, some facts. Maybe I'll throw in some like witty hashtag in there as well, but just kind of keep it straightforward, keep it simple, get straight to the point. Not really like super long statuses that can be like super vague and like hitting all these points, all this way and that. I think for personal life, I use Snapchat more so for that. That's when I can just be a total goofball and be like, I don't really care what I post on here. Like, it can be something political. It can be me just like hanging out with friends or something like that.
Do you get a lot of backlash when you post stuff on Facebook? Even if it's as neutral as you can possibly be. I saw one time that you did post something about being more in the middle and how, there are some things, I think specifically you mentioned that Trump does that you're like, yeah, that's reasonable, that's fine, I like that. And then some things he does or conservatives say, you're just like, that's not at all okay. And same thing with liberals, and same thing with Democrats, in general. So what have you gotten any feedback on that?
Most of the feedback that I get is positive, and I'm very thankful for that, because I always kind of go in, I'm a little bit pessimistic, because especially if I post something that is political, I know it's almost like no matter how you say it or what you're saying, it's gonna probably push like someone's buttons or trigger someone. But most of the feedback I get is that it's just kind of generally positive though, because I do always try to make a fact and make a point out of it to like say, you know, if I'm gonna like bash one side or something, you know, like if the left side was like going way far out, like, you know, I'll bash them, I'll call them out on it, like, hey, this is kind of extreme, like, hold up. But then I will still be more than happy to like call out the right side as well, you know. So it's just kind of like, I think if people like keep up with my posts, then they will see how like, okay, yeah, Eli's like, you know, in the middle ground, he's gonna say it as it is for both sides. If it is someone kind of new that I like met not too long ago, sometimes it gets a little bit shaky with them, because then they'll comment and be like, well, what do you think about this? Like, what about the left side, and see what they're doing. And I was like, oh honey, I hate both sides.
Yeah.
So like, don't get it wrong, you know, on this one post. But I don't know. I guess the worst negative feedback I've gotten is probably just like some people blocked me. But if someone ever did come up and like asked me about it though, and said like, hey, I don't really agree like with your standpoint on this, like, why did you think this? I will usually try to switch that to then like on Messenger or something, just because I also don't want drama on my wall.
Yeah.
Because that's like, once you start getting so many people involved, it's just kind of a bit much. So I'll just use like, let's continue this conversation on Messenger. Like, I still want to have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
Like, you know, for growth and stuff like that. But I also just don't want too much drama on my Facebook wall.
Yeah, so. I love that you do that as well, because I do that. Well, now more days I'll just, if I know them and I know that they're here, I'll just bring them on the show, because I want people to hear the interaction. I want them to know how here's one way to do it, you know. But I think that that's something not a lot of people, you can't see it. You can't see the message that, you know, you send to somebody else who commented on a post. They don't see that. They see the comment section. And so I think people have gotten into this mentality on social media where they think that it's kind of just a dumping ground for the worst things you have to say about the other side of the political spectrum, of the, you know, ideological spectrum, religious affiliation spectrum, whatever. I think that because people aren't seeing the person and the conversations that some people like you and me initiate, instead of hashing it out on the comment section, people think that it's okay to troll.
Yeah.
Basically.
The message can definitely get lost and misconstrued. So
yeah, it is wild. And so yeah, I wanted to know, like, how do you decide what to even put out there, you know, because there is such a risk now of being, I think, sometimes purposefully misinterpreted and, you know, misunderstood as to what you were actually saying versus what somebody can deliberately twist into making you sound, at its worst, homophobic or racist or sexist, whatever. Do you see that a lot on, maybe not on yours, I know that you don't get a whole lot of negative feedback, but do you see that it's been referred to as the Outraged Brigade? The Outraged Brigade is the new term for people who, it's kind of like social justice warrior.
Yeah.
That term's changed a lot too. I don't know if you know anything about. I know what it first meant. It was first like an insult from conservatives, I think, about toward, you know, liberal snowflakes, and then liberals adopted it and were like, yeah, absolutely, I fight for social justice. And now it's become more of a, not an insult, but just a way to categorize a subgroup of liberals who troll on Facebook.
It's like, to generalize it, my one issue overall, like just with the whole like social justice warrior like idea and theme,
okay,
is it's almost like pick and choose your battles kind of thing, because I think you can take something to such an extreme where like you nitpick, and again, like this is just the interpretation like I've gotten from, you know, what I've seen, my personal interactions have been.
Yeah, go ahead.
But it's almost like, you know, little things, every microaggression, every minor thing, like if there is a problem, they will talk about it, they'll hash it out like 100%. And I think that can, one, definitely like burn people out a lot for sure. So like it's emotionally taxing on that individual in the first place. And two, it's kind of like there are issues, you know, to be discussed, but sometimes it does seem a little bit like they're grasping for straws almost. And then it just kind of seems like, is this really necessary to be talking about right now? Is this really what we need to be putting a lot of this energy into?
Can you think of an example that comes to mind when you talk about that?
So in terms of, I was actually talking with one of my roommates. There was this talk or discussion about trash bags and how there need to be more white trash bags, and how companies are switching more towards white ones because I guess a long time ago all the trash bags were always black, and then they saw that as like, that's racist. That's like saying that like if it's black it's trash, if it's white it can't be. And it turned into this huge debacle, and I was just kind of like, that just seems like such a stretch to me. It just seems like I don't think that people actually had the intention when they were making trash bags to just be like, you know what, I hate black people, so like we're gonna make this product that has a lot of trash, and you know what would be the greatest kicker? Let's just make the trash bags black too, because I just really hate black people, so let's do this.
I think they're trash.
Like, I think that's like really grasping, because like you can say like, well, there's institutional racism, like maybe they like subconsciously thought of it, you know, subconsciously associate like black with being like trashy or stuff like that. But so that's just like one example off the top of my head that I discussed with one of my roommates lately about. So it's kind of issues with that, I get, because that could be seen as like a microaggression kind of thing. If you're gonna be like a social justice warrior on bigger topics about like, you know, with healthcare, with education, kind of like grander scale, a little bit more substantial, and not so much grabbing for straws, then yes, speak out about it, still be respectful, hear all sides out, you know. But if you want to focus your energy on that, by all means, go for it. But don't come for the trash bags. It's almost like,
and I know, and I've felt this too, that when you hear people, did you hear this from social media or from a friend that told you about the trash bags, like that said that?
My roommate first brought it up because he was asking me about it, because I think I was like literally just taking out the trash, and he said, hey, did you hear about this? Because we just do that a lot anyways. Like sometimes would have like read an article earlier in the day or something, and so I'll be like, did you hear about this? Like, what's going on? You know, and I mean, I looked in a little bit into it. I don't know when it got started or when like this decision was made. So have I done like full on in-depth internet research? No, I haven't. It was just mainly the conversation I had with him.
I was just asking because I was wondering who first brought it up. Because if it was somebody, and I haven't heard of that, so I really don't know anything about that. I've never heard that before, but it doesn't surprise me. I was wondering if that person was either black or Hispanic or Afro-American or Afro-Hispanic, because it's almost like if it's someone, even if it's like LGBT, if someone from the LGBT community brings up something that's, even if it's not completely obvious at first that they're grasping at straws, it's almost like you don't want to question it, because if you do, you'll be called racist, homophobic, sexist, Nazi sympathizer, Nazi apologist, whatever. And so I see that there's this pressure that's shifted, and I think it used to be over with the conservatives, and now it's kind of shifted to liberals and the left, this pressure to conform to whatever. It's like, whatever you say, like, I'm sure that's valid because you said it and you would know. Mm-hmm. And I saw this, one example of that is I saw a post. It must have been, I don't use Twitter. I have one, but I just don't use it because I have Facebook. It must have been a Twitter post that someone had screenshotted and then shared on Facebook. And it said that if someone is calling you out for something you said that they say is racist, homophobic, or sexist, you need to acknowledge that and then fix it. And I was just thinking, okay, but what if that person doesn't even know what those words mean and just assumes that that if I say I have black trash bags and they call me racist, then I have to be like, oh yeah, good point. I just, there's this new problem of we want to, I feel like liberals in general one of our values, and you can agree with this or not, one of the part of being a liberal is that we value people's experiences, individual experiences, and we want people's voices to be heard, and we want diversity, and we want inclusivity, and we want intersectional, and we want to validate people for who they are and how they feel about things. But I think that that's been taken advantage of a lot by people who, honestly, I don't think really care about these issues. I think they really are just miserable inside and need something to, I mean, I think they're just like the people on the right who have chips on their shoulders, because there's this new trend that's like, if you want to question the logic behind somebody saying that something is racist, you have now become racist. Mm-hmm. Do you see that? Do you agree with that at all? That's kind of what's been happening lately?
I definitely do see that, and so I'll have 2 points on that. One is that is kind of a reason why I consider myself a little bit more of a moderate, because I do understand if, the generalization is like conservative is do your own thing, no one else, mess with it. And liberal is like, no, you should like really take into consideration, the community as a whole, how you're doing as well as your neighbor kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And, being a moderate, I feel like there is that balance. There is to a certain degree where it is just kind of like, I should be able to pursue my own happiness, do my own thing. Like, absolutely. If I want to collect rainwater at my place, save some water, I should be able to do that. But then at the same time, it's like, I also still believe it's important to make sure that, like, people in, like, lower income families, or, like, if a place is more racially black or, like, minority, that they have the same resources and education as, like, predominantly white communities. Mm-hmm. So, like, I still want the protection and to, do my own thing, pursue my own happiness. I want no one else to be happy with that too, so it's just, kind of find the medium. So I do see that a lot of people just going so far in one direction. It's either all or nothing. And I'm like, no, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Yeah. And then the second point, I don't know if you heard a bit about the Mikado, the opera that was done here Mm-mm. So there was, what's going on with that? Some issues before it had actually aired or was actually performed, that it was racist towards like the Asian community, and how it was very like whitewashed over, and it was making fun of the culture. And so I talked with some friends about it, because there were discussions how the cast would all be wearing like for the wigs and costumes and stuff. One example, they would all have to have black hair, because like if it's an Asian culture, there's not really like blonde or redheads, mm-hmm. stuff like that. And some people were saying like that's almost like yellow face, or black face, yellow face, white face, and kind of whitewashing it. And I was trying to discuss, because like I do theater, and I was like, there is a way when you are portraying a character, you want to make it like realistic. you can do like a funny character if you're doing like a melodrama, and so like if you're gonna be the country drunkard, you know, you play into stereotypes. But then like even if you are a white actor that is playing as another race, you know, you can still portray that character in still a respectful way. Like you can go too far, or like if they were pushing back their eyes, you know, to look squinty, like really going into you know, stereotypes. But I just think it's a wig. It's just like if the person was a redhead, then like they would kind of stick out, I feel like, if they're trying to play as like an Asian character. But that was definitely a very difficult conversation for me, because having that discussion, there are some things that I said, I was like, wow, they're probably going to think I'm racist after this. But what I appreciated out of the whole thing, though, was that we did have that discussion. And for me personally, it did make me realize how, you know, because I was looking at it from the perspective of an actor, of someone that, you know, does theater. It's kind of like that whole, you want to be able to portray the character as respectful and as true as possible. And so it could be sometimes miscommunication in terms of like, you may think that like, hey, I'm doing this part justice, I'm giving due credit where it is. But then if the community looks in and says like, hey, you went too far, like you have to take that, you know, into consideration.
Sure, yeah.
And so, you know, I even learned a little bit out of it. Maybe, you know, I could say like there are some like mild, I'm trying to figure out how I want to say it, like I was racist in some of the thoughts that I was having in the ideology. You know, was I full blown? No. But like if you had to categorize it, definitely probably leaned a little bit towards like, wow, Eli, you're not being really sensitive to this right now. So I mean, it was an awkward conversation, but you know, I just talked it through. I was just like, I don't think I'm being that racist. You guys are as insensitive. Like, but let's talk about it. Let's go.
Yeah.
And after, you know, having them hear me out completely, you know, not like cutting off or generalizing, and hearing them out, I'm like, you know, I can actually see where you guys were coming from and why you thought this way. So
yeah. How did that conversation go? I mean, you said it was awkward, but how did
it was awkward. Just because I also think it's one thing to be told you're wrong, and it's another thing to be told, Eli, I think that's a little bit racist. Like that's a whole nother like ballpark, I kind of feel like, of anxiety. But in the end, because I think we both, you know, kind of learned from each other. Definitely I learned more about, you know, trying to be, you know, self-aware, like intersectionality, you know, seeing how different viewpoints and stuff like that go. I mean, I thanked them, first of all. I'm just like, I know this is a very like awkward conversation, but I wanted to have it. I wanted to learn. I wanted to like fully see where they were coming from. So afterwards I thanked them, like, hey, like, thank you for even having this conversation with me. I know it was rough for a little bit.
Sure.
Definitely. But I'm glad I had it, you know, because had we just cut it off right then and there, I wouldn't have known, you know, how insensitive, you know, I could have been in the future towards like, and it doesn't even matter if it was like people in the Asian community, because it could have easily transferred and like bled into like other ethnicities, you know, and just be like, even if I think I'm being as respectful as I can be, it could still be taken the wrong way. Like personal intention, even if it's, you have the right intention, it can still come off wrong. So
yeah. What did culture I mean, I know obviously culture played a big part in actors portraying characters, but it makes me think, because when TV shows or movies or really anything that we watch for entertainment is trying to portray a different culture that's not ours, there tends to be a lot of dispute, a lot of tension there when it comes to audience responses. But then when it's something like, if it's taking place in the 18th, 17th century. And if you're portraying, you know, a Jane Austen type character who is a woman, and so she's probably reserved, probably doesn't have a whole lot of freedom around her own house, definitely dependent on a husband or a father. It's not challenged because we know that that's how it was, but nobody's going to say that's sexist because obviously it's sexist. Mm-hmm. And so it makes me think about sometimes when these problems come from how people are portrayed. I do think that sometimes it's not fair to the culture when it's something like, for example, black hair when it comes to Hispanics. You know, most Hispanics are naturally dark-haired, and that's okay. Not all of them are. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I think that if it's not delivered right, you can really mess with the audience. Not mess with the audience, but you really get a lot of backlash, a lot of backfire if you don't deliver it right. And so if you're, I don't know, and it's never, I hope it would never be that petty that somebody would be angry that all the Hispanics in a movie have black hair. But sometimes I feel like it can get that facetious, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because it's not like people don't dye their hair, it's still accurate to say that even though people will dye their hair, most Hispanics just have black hair, and that's okay to say, and that's okay if most Hispanics in movies and TV shows aren't gonna be blonde and blue-eyed. You know, some of them are, obviously. You know, Cameron Diaz is Cuban. Mm-hmm. Obviously it depends on culture, depends on the area, and so I think sometimes that too is ignored, and it's like you have to take into consideration where creators are coming from too. You know, they have to take in consideration where the audiences are and where the cultures actually are as opposed to stereotypes, but then we also have to understand where the creators are coming from when they're trying to picture these things. Did you ever hear about a new HBO series that hasn't come out yet? They've just talked about it. That's all they've done is talked about. They're going to create a new series where it's a counter historical take on the Civil War and the Confederates win. Have you heard about this?
I've heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And people freaked out. Got very, 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 very upset. And I talked to Stephanie about this for hours one night because she was very upset about it too. And so we got into an argument about it, really, because where I'm coming from is they're not saying this is what should have happened. They're saying, well, of course, we don't know what they're saying yet because it hasn't happened. But I'm not going to assume that that's where they're coming from. I'm not going to assume that they're saying, let's make this world real to audiences because this is the ideal world. You know, it's more of like, it's just a creative space. People do it all the time. People do, you know, George Orwell was super controversial in his day too because of 1984, you know, the book where it's Big Brother and all these things, and, you know, you can't have sex and all these crazy controversial issues that go on in this book. And it's like, you know, he wasn't doing that because he was saying this is what it should be like. Mm-hmm. He was saying he was taking us on a journey to that space and trying to get us to think and acknowledge where we are now, and that could be a real possibility if you really consider it, you know. So what did you think about that when that announcement came out, when you heard people talking about it? What was going through your mind at that time?
I think, and it's not really like just with this specific, you know, series, because there have been similar sometimes like just with TV shows I would just do like a flashback scenario or something like that. But I think just generally when these kinds of topics are brought up, it is something that is going to make people uncomfortable, and so it's going to get, like, you know, a lot of backlash. I can see it a little bit from a marketing perspective because, like, it gives publicity to it. Definitely gets people talking about it.
Yeah, that's true.
So I can see sometimes too why, you know, a director may sometimes purposely want to be like, what is a good topic I can talk about that people are going to, you know, talk about and want to see. So aside from the marketing aspect, it again just has to be very tastefully done. Like, I think if you're going to do it, it is not something you can do half-ass, because if you're going to, especially doing a whole series about it, doing a movie about it, you know, just all the money and time that you're putting into it, I think it would have to be like, you're not going to please everyone for sure, but generally it has to be done respectful, and you have to, you know, the conversations that's going to be happening afterwards about it, being able to, you know, facilitate those kinds of conversations. So I think I'm looking more so forward to not so much the series itself once it comes out. I mean, I'll still be looking towards that, but I will also be looking to see how the producers and actors, you know, handle, you know, the publicity afterwards once it comes out. Are they just going to tell people like, oh, it's a movie, suck it up, it's okay? Or are they, you know, going to be willing to talk, you know, further in depth, like why they made the decisions they did?
Yeah.
If there's like a particularly, you know, traumatic scene, you know, they may ask like, what made you decide to, like, you know, portray this? Why did you think this was acceptable?
So just make sure they're ready for the questions, is what you're saying.
Because I feel like if you're going to put something out there that's so, like, controversial, if you don't help facilitate the conversation afterwards and you kind of leave it towards, like, public opinion to make their own kind of decision on it, then, like, your main intention could be totally lost. Because, like, Dear White People, you know, that could have been something that created an us versus them mentality, you know? Because, like, if it wasn't facilitated in a way, and if the producers and actors, like, didn't kind of help direct the conversation of what they wanted to do with it, then, like, people could just see, like, oh, now, like, it's just whites versus blacks, like, let's go. When the whole idea of it was to just, like, raise awareness and be like, hey, no, these are, like, issues, you know, that we're bringing, and we want you to be aware of it so we can, like, come together, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, like, once it was, like, more so described and explained, you know, to the general public, then the direction of where they wanted it to go was easier to get there. Because had they not
I thought
had
they
that
did
support,
a really good.
then, like, we've all seen social media. It could have easily, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So talk to me about Cardi B.
Oh, Kurt, I can't roll my R's.
Yeah. So talk to me. So I saw, I didn't want to misquote or anything. So I ended up taking a screenshot of what you had posted.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can find it.
That's actually been one of my... I've received more comments about that status, actually, than probably anything in the last couple of months.
Really?
Yes. I was just
When
like,
did
really?
When did you post
out
that?
of Cardi B, out of all the things I'm posting, this is what people want to talk to me about?
Okay, so let me read it so that people know what we're going to be referencing, and then tell me about the comments. Okay. So the status is... Cardi B is trash and profits off LGBT culture while simultaneously not supporting or giving due credit to the LGBT community. So comments.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I thought it was just interesting too because it's one of my, like, not quite so professional, you know, status. I'm like, oh, she's trash, like, blah blah blah. So I was seeing, like, you know, different interviews with her because, like, she's been blowing up, especially after winning the award for Bodak Yellow and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And basically becoming, like, a power couple in the hip hop industry
with Offset.
Yeah, and there was an interview that she was at. I can't remember what show she was on, but basically it was, like, going over her terminology.
Jimmy Fallon?
I think it was because it was phrases that they were going over was like her
Yeah.
on tongue.
Yeah.
And so like once it got to the occur, again, can't roll my R's, but like that part, because I'll just call it out right now and say it for what it is. That is an LGBTQ thing.
What
like,
is?
The phrase like occur, like it really originated a lot from like the drag culture.
Oh, okay.
Drag community.
Okay. The colloquial. Okay. Yeah.
And so she talked about it, and for her influences, stuff like that, like where she got it. I felt like that was probably a really good plug for like got this from the gay culture and stuff like that, and the fact that maybe this is me that's like looking at microaggressions and being a social justice warrior, but the way I kind of saw it was this was another thing that like the gays created. I'm generalizing a lot here, but like the gays created, and then it was just straight washed, and then it was just like, oh, okay, now like heteronormative culture is doing it, because like especially with the lip sync battles that they do now, and I think
the
it would be
TV show or
because they do like there was like Channing Tatum and all them that do it, and I think that would be such a great platform if like they brought in actual drag queens to like host that, or someone that actually was like part of that culture. But it's lot really straight washed, which like it does raise awareness, because like shows like RuPaul's Drag Race every year, like it's gaining traction as well. But I just kind of see these little things where it's just getting straight washed. So I was a little bit salty about that. I was like, it could have been so easy to say like, even if she said like, oh, when I'm hanging out with like the queens at the club or something like that, like some kind of phrase, not just to be like, oh, this is all me, I came up with it, I'm super original for it. I was just like, okay, honey, like give credit where it's due. And so seeing some other like interviews that she had done, there was an issue too where Offset had like called someone a faggot, or like had used that language, and Cardi was like defending him.
He called someone a faggot?
This was a couple months ago, so I'm not totally fresh, but I do know that like I didn't really look so much of like what the situation with Offset was. Okay. I was more so looking at like Cardi B's like reaction to it.
Okay.
So basically there was the word faggot involved in a derogatory way towards like people in the LGBTQ community. And so Cardi B was like defending him, saying like, well, I don't know what's wrong with you gays. Like, you guys get offended at everything. You should just like let us know ahead of time, like what's okay and what's not okay to say. And like, don't come for my man kind of thing. And the way it was just like such an attack and such of like a making us look bad, like we were the ones that like being snowflakes and we all should have like calmed down, when it was just like, okay, I understand your man is getting attacked, like that's kind of cool, but it just was not very tasteful. And afterwards, even after the whole thing, there wasn't like a genuine apology. I just kind of feel like it was just left as is, and just like, well, I'm gonna take this side, fuck the other side, like I don't care if you think I'm offensive, which like does kind of portray into the image she is trying to make anyways, where it's like, she doesn't care about the other side. So I can kind of see where she's coming from, and publicists may be like, okay, building this image, but it's just leaving a not so great taste in my mouth, let me tell you.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like her actual like music talent or whatever, I'm kind of indifferent. Like, congrats to her. I don't have anything against her talent. I'm not going to say, oh, she doesn't know what she's doing. I just kind of feel like with the platform that she's had so far, especially since she's been blowing up so much lately, I just don't, bad taste.
Sure.
Not living for it.
Yeah. So that phrase that the phrase that you first started talking about, that she got from queens, or just from LGBT community in
it
general?
Would because I believe it like started with the drag like community, because that's
Okay.
kind of a lot of the slang, like yes honey, just a lot of the lingo pretty much originates from drag. It then bleeds into the rest of the community, like with the gays, the lesbians, and then from that point it then bleeds into, you know, straight culture. The joke is always like white girls get everything from their gay best friends, you know. And like I do also like challenge that stereotype sometimes, but this is again just me like generalizing the general flow.
Sure. So I don't remember if she was, I remember when she was talking about to Jimmy Fallon, I don't recall her saying that that's where she got it from. So did somebody else say that that's where she got it from, or like did she say that she was hanging out with queens and then learned it from them?
No, she didn't. I think I was saying that as like an example of what she could have said. There was pretty much like because I think at some point he was asked like, where did you come up with all of these like phrases and stuff like that,
right?
And there was just, she's like, oh, I'm just at a club like doing my own thing, and like no reference towards like the LGBTQ community. When I was like,
right. Well, so my
that?
question is, how do we know that's where she got it?
Well, where else would she have gotten it from?
Well, so if you, I mean, we can go back into, we can start with the queens, but then even before the queens, drag queens. I feel like I should say that so that everybody knows that I'm not talking about like royalty. I think everyone mostly knows that I'm talking about drag queens. I'm pretty sure it also comes from the minority community, so the black community, Hispanic community. It's a colloquial. It's like kind of its own colloquial culture. There is that. I think it actually originated from black communities and African American communities and African communities and Afro-Hispanic and Hispanic communities. I think that's where it started, and then you have Hispanic and black queens, drag queens. I don't think they get mentioned enough, honestly. But so, you know, we can go back and who said it first, but I'm wondering where this,
I mean,
like ownership of these words comes from, you know, because even if let's say it did start, you know, we draw that line, it started with drag queens, you know. Why is it, I want to know why it's so offensive that Cardi B does not say directly it was them. Because, like, what if she didn't get it from them? Because she is from the Bronx, and she is Afro-Hispanic, she's Dominican. And part of why Cardi B is such a big deal, and I honestly, I think she's real goofy. Like, I think she's hilarious and silly, and I think she knows that. I do think it is her shtick to say those weird phrases and, you know, and all that stuff. Like, it's definitely her shtick, and it works really well for her. But also, she really genuinely could have gotten it from her community, you know, in the Bronx and with other Afro-Hispanics and Dominicans and blacks that she grew up with there in her neck of the woods, I guess you could say. And so this comes up a lot when I see when these trends of especially when a celebrity says something like that, and we'll get into more of what Offset actually said and everything, but I'm just wondering like why it's so hard to hear her not say that, because my question is, how do we know that's where she got it from, that she was hanging out with queens all the time and then just didn't mention them when she was asked, you know, why do you talk like that, you know, because I do think a lot of it is just who she grew up around, and those could have been queens, of course, but I think that when you not shorten it, when you narrow it down to who exactly started this, I think maybe, yes, say I got it from the LGBT community, but I also, as someone who is Hispanic and is also from the LGBT community, part of the LGBT community, I just can't I just can't find it in myself to be outraged that she didn't mention us, you know what I mean? And so I'm wondering where that comes from for you.
So the first topic I want to talk about, and I'll get to that, is it probably did come from Black drag queens. I do feel like if we did take further steps back in terms of like just drag queens in general, a lot of times the terminology is also then started even in the drag community from Black queens, and then it bleeds into white queens. Like the Black community and just like the minority community in general are probably like the strongest in terms of like the culture, because you know, you could say that like they got dealt, you know, a bad hand, like a double negative. Like they're minorities in two different ways. Not only were they Black, but they were also, you know, part of the LGBTQ. And like going back to like, you know, the voguing and the underground like clubs and stuff like that. So I mean, I think I'm trying to say, like, I agree with you that like it probably was a Black queen that like did start that. Like and so, you know, that Black queen could have like bled, whether it bled through from Black community and then got to Cardi B, or it bled from like Black queen to white queen to then, you know, the community. I'm saying I agree with you. It probably did start with a Black queen and all that jazz. So not trying to like take away credit to that. So the reason why I think it's important that we are acknowledged or our voices heard is generally we don't have as much history, I think, in terms of not only our contributions to like just culture, in terms of like, you know, pop culture and stuff like that, but also just like in the science field and stuff like that. Like, because Alan Turing, who started that whole thing, like he's part of the LGBTQ community. Do a lot of people know that? No. And in a lot of like this culture thing, like even with the lip sync challenges, do they decide to like help educate, you know, I mean, okay, don't quote me on this entirely.
Okay.
But like, because I just see like clips that get shared on Facebook, so I just kind of see the performances. But it's like
of lip sync battle?
Of the lip sync battles, yeah. Are they doing much to like raise awareness or contribute, you know, to where they kind of got their influences from? I'm not really sure. It's just kind of because in the moment, yes, it's probably not that big of a deal. Like, if you're in a group project or something, and then someone asks like the team leader, like, who did what? And if they say like, oh, I did this all on my own, like in the moment, yes, it's probably not that big of a deal. But then when it kind of seems like this constant where a lot of times you're contributing a lot to it, and yet you're still not given that due credit, because then it just kind of seems like our voice is in a way being like muffled or hidden. Other things in my mind that I relate to, like when our voices are being heard, like with the U.S. Census, a lot of times in terms of like getting resources available for like LGBTQ youth, like homeless shelters or stuff like that. One of the things they say is like, well, there's not enough statistics on it. Like, how many people is this really going to affect? How much is this? And so that's why like the U.S. Census was such a big deal, when it's like they going back and forth. It's like, we are gonna ask like, you know, people to like self-identify, you know, if they're straight, if they're gay, or they're not, and looks like they're not gonna do it again. And so like that's a chance for like our voice to be heard, for us to become like more validated. I mean, still overall, I would say that we've been moving forward, because like marriage was a huge thing for us, you know. So I don't want to say like a total negative Nancy, like, oh man, like nothing is going good for us and like all this other stuff. I just want us to just still be aware and like see these little things, so that way they don't continue to grow, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, so is what you're saying that it's It's just about the recognizing that we're a thing.
Yes.
In general. Okay. I agree that is something that needs to be addressed, for sure. I do agree that the LGBT community needs that representation, whether it's in Hollywood or in film, cinematic industry, or in journalism or news, politically especially. And when it comes to people like Alan Turing, the guy who made the first computer and figured out the Nazi code and basically helped us win World War II, absolutely people should know about that. And they should absolutely know about that he was gay, because he was hounded for it and eventually committed suicide because he was so harassed for it and so isolated, even though he basically helped win World War II. But when it comes to Cardi B making funny noises, I just think it's such a small, if it's an offense at all, I think it's just so small to worry about Cardi B making silly noises and not saying where she got those silly noises from, and so I understand the recognition part, and that's important to, it should be important to everybody, I mean, but it's more like, it would be different to me if she were using, I'm trying to be very specific, so if she were constantly seen and talking about how she hangs out with a lot of LGBT individuals, especially drag queens, and then she told everybody that she's coming up with all these new slang words, and then mentioned nothing about who she's hanging out with and who she got that from. Yeah, I think that's a little bit of plagiarism, especially if she starts putting these things in her songs. But I just, knowing when I read more about Cardi B and especially the things that she says about domestic violence and about women who are strippers, basically, and who are basically kind of dismissed by everybody just because they're like, well, you're a stripper, so you're a hoe, so you don't matter. When I see her standing up for those things, that matters more to me than when she makes a funny noise and then doesn't say that she may or may not have gotten it from drag queens. You know what I mean? And so, man, I don't want people to think that I'm passionate about Cardi B, because I'm really not. I might be a little passionate about Cardi B, but I do think she's goofy, and I think that needs to be said. She's definitely a silly person. Mm-hmm. It's just that I don't think it's fair to call her trash. but we can get into what actually sparked that was what Offset had been saying, right? Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to know, because I saw this. I saw your post later, but I had seen somebody else talking about Offset's lyrics. And so what happened was there was a line in one of his songs. I don't know the name of the song. I'm sure that people will know it easily, where he says, I don't either mess with or hang out with, something about he doesn't fool around with queers, is what the lyrics said. If that's what we're both talking about. Or was there another instance that I'm not aware of where he called somebody a faggot?
As far as I know, the instance did I think it did use the word faggot. I mean,
so maybe that's something else.
Possibly. I mean, again, I probably should have looked into that a little bit more, but I didn't really know much about Offset so much.
I don't know much about Cardi, Offset himself either. But the one that I saw when somebody shared a direct link to it was where I got it from. So maybe they were talking about something else than you were, but so this is what I saw, was that he said something to the extent, the nature of it was, I don't mess around with queers, something like that. And when people started to question him and challenge him about that, he responded by taking a screenshot of the word queer. He looked it up on the internet and took a screenshot of the dictionary definition of queer and said, actually, I didn't mean like gay, I meant like weird. I meant like, I believe the official definition was odd, or at least that's what he said. So he was like, I didn't mean, you know, well, he didn't say fag. In this instance, it wasn't faggot, but I think he was just saying, no, like, I'm not saying I don't hang out with gay people. I'm saying I don't hang out with, you know, people with backstabbers and weird people, I think was what he was saying. And then Cardi, this is what I saw, and then Cardi was also being questioned about it too, because they're engaged or married now. And her response was what you were saying, which is basically, you know, he's never, she said, he's never like, he's never purposefully not been friends with gay people. He's never treated them differently. Like, if you guys, you know, we didn't know that queer was a bad word, basically. And then the LGBT response to that was, why do we have to educate you on queer? And so what I got from that was Offset used the word queer and in a song lyric, and people went nuts, and maybe righteously so, because it does sound like he's saying, I don't mess with queers. You know, it sounds like he's saying, I don't want to be friends with you because you're a queer, because you're gay. Mm-hmm. But then when I saw him responding to it and saying, that's not what I meant, and then people were kind of saying, yes, it is what you meant. And then when Cardi was saying, he's not homophobic, I know him, she got backlash for saying that. And so that's how I was seeing that progression. Mm-hmm. And that's where I personally have to draw the line for myself and say, I think people have lost their minds a little bit, because when you think that somebody says something intentionally offensive and you call them out for it, by all means, I think you should. But when they explain to you then what they actually meant, take their word for it. You know, because when you then say that's not what you meant, then you're speaking for the person and you're not listening anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The one little interjection that I would have into that is, I think, and you know, whether it was like an honest mistake and stuff like that, mm-hmm. Are we ever going to really truly know? No. Like, because maybe it was just really good publicity and, you know, the right thing to say afterwards. So I'm not going to bother with that so much. More so just, if you look into like the hip hop culture, mm-hmm. there is a huge issue of like homophobia in the hip hop culture.
Well, yeah.
And there is, you know, people that get out of the industry that then like come out after they're out of the industry, because once they did come out during, and again, you know, it is getting better, but mm-hmm. you do hear like Macklemore in one of his songs was talking about like, you know, issues of, you know, it's not okay to be gay in the hip hop industry and stuff like that. So I think it just might have once, kind of what we talked a little bit earlier about like just the intentions, and so mm-hmm. his intention could have, you know, possibly been to like, oh, I'm just using this like describe an odd individual, but then like the context and the crowd that you're saying it in, like if you're saying like, I don't like queer people in a room full of like where homophobia is a huge rampant issue, then you can't really be that surprised that people mm-hmm. would then take it that way. So I think it was just maybe some more thought, you know, could have been done into it. Could have been an honest mistake, sure, like give benefit of the doubt, and like even if like he did mean it in a negative way, you know, probably this experience, you know, could have changed his opinion, you know, like mm-hmm. am I gonna hold it against him forever? Nah, like we all make mistakes. Like mm-hmm. even in my conversation calling Cardi B trash, we probably jumped the gun a little bit, you know. So like, you know, as long as the outcome of it is now positive, mm-hmm. you know, like something good came out of it, like that's cool. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think you do make a good point about how common homophobia is in hip hop culture. And the reason I think that is because there's also a lot of misogyny too, in especially rap and in hip hop. And the reason I think both of those things exist is because both of those problems also exist in minority communities, in Black and Hispanic communities, and those are predominantly who make up the hip hop and rap culture. And so when we see these expressions of homophobia and even misogyny, it is coming from something much bigger, which is the culture that also I think needs to be addressed too. But and we run into this problem I see when we talk about things like, have you ever heard of Latinx? I bring that up every once in a while on.
Yes, because isn't it pronounced like Latinx?
So, yeah, there's not really a real way to pronounce it. It's the problem with Latinx is that it's basically one culture, which is the English-speaking culture, imposing their ideology onto non-English-speaking cultures, particularly Spanish-speaking. And so I'm seeing that sometimes with how the social media responds to things, for example, with what Offset said, and it's almost like I see one culture criticizing another one. So I see the LGBT community and I see the LGBT culture, and I see them seeing homophobia in another culture that is completely different and bigger, and the problems are very, very complex and need to be addressed for sure and talked about it. And I agree with you that it's getting better, because I think people are talking about it more, and Macklemore saying things about it and not being afraid to tell people that this is what's happening in the industry. But I think that when we're talking about the roots of where that comes from, I just think we should just be very careful and very mindful of the fact that it's not just coming from a surface level, that was homophobic, don't ever say that again. Like, this is something that's very, very ingrained, subconsciously very, very ingrained into Black and Hispanic communities. Homophobia, misogyny, toxic masculinity, those things are very, very much alive and pervasive in those cultures, just like they are in white culture too. But it is different in Hispanic and Black culture because, well, I don't really know why. I don't know how to explain. I don't know how to pinpoint exactly how it's different. But I don't want to see, and I'm not saying that I think that you're doing this, but I see other people doing this. That, like, when the post that I saw before I even looked at yours, I saw it as kind of white culture telling Black and Hispanic culture, hey, you guys need to fix this. And it's kind of like, well, I mean, I think they're aware of that, and I think that they have the ability, and and I think everybody has the equal amount of intelligence to fix it, as they are doing. And so I don't want it to look like white culture is basically trying to better Black and Hispanic culture by making them more like white culture. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think anybody's doing that on purpose, and I don't think that's something people are consciously like, yes, I'm going to change that culture over there to be more like mine because mine is right. But I do think that's kind of what's being expressed sometimes when we don't take into consideration that this misogyny and homophobia that we're seeing that's ingrained in hip-hop culture is also ingrained in an entire community behind that. And it's not that I'm saying it shouldn't be addressed and it shouldn't be held, and those people shouldn't be held accountable for what they're saying. But it's also like, it just sometimes seems like white culture is imposing onto other cultures, just like they are with Latinx, and there is a lot of debate about Latinx and stuff like that, but the way I saw it anyway was that English speaking people were saying your language is really sexist, so you should change it. And it's like, I don't think they realize how incredibly, I don't even know what to call it, not like xenophobic, but just, I don't know what the right word is for it. It was just so like cringe, you know, because it's almost, I'm still, even when I think about it, when I talk about it, just gets me so riled up, because it's like, you just can't tell people how to talk. You just can't change a language based on your culture, because it's not yours to screw with. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, go ahead. And what do you have to say to all that? I said a lot. So.
No, it's all good. I think it is kind of like, you know, in terms of like pushing, you know, our personal cultures and stuff like that, you know, we sometimes don't think of it as like, hey, like, I think I'm going to push, you know, what has like worked for me. And like some people might be aware of like, okay, you know, of like white culture, and other times people might not see that. They might not see as like their culture is like on a grander scale, you know, it's typically white. They just see it, again, kind of like a more personal, individual kind of idea basis. And so they may, you know, once again, may have the right intentions, coming off as an insensitive swine.
I do think people mostly have the right intention. I want to make that clear. I don't think that anybody's consciously saying we need to save these savages from their archaic ways, but sometimes that is what it's doing. is this, you know, that complex of, that kind of Columbus complex of, oh, we have to save these people from their old gods, basically, you know. And in the same breath, I do think misogyny and homophobia are both big problems in Hispanic and Black communities.
I think it's also prevalent even in like, at least of the whole LGBTQ, just with the G, like just in the gay community.
Oh yeah.
Like,
oh yeah.
Homophobia
Absolutely.
in terms of like toxic masculinity. Because there are some men where, like, you know, because I have some facial hair, you know, stuff like that, but there'll be some men that are like, your voice is too high, like that's too feminine for me.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, really? My voice? Of all the things? Why? If you're gonna
wait till they hear your laugh.
Yeah, I know. I can give you a legitimate reason to not like me. Like, it's not that hard. I'm ready for it.
Oh no.
But it's just like the lack of there's so many ways I could go like about this, but generally, if people were just like more open to other cultures, just in general, and not so much of a way of how, like, if you see someone that's like different or something, like, how can I make them more like me, kind of thing, in terms of like, how can I make this individual fit in my life? It's kind of like, what can I do to like learn from this other side? And I think, like, if we're going to be throwing out solutions here, like, what should we do to like make this all better? I think one of the biggest things we could do is making learning a second language mandatory in schools, because I think just with language alone, you know, if kids learn it at a simple age, because if you go to Europe, I went to a homestay family freshman year of high school in Austria, and so I was like with kids, I was like going to their school, and they are asking me like, well, how many languages do you know? And I'm just like, I know English. That's like, I can say maybe 3 words in Spanish. And over there, I mean, it does make a little bit more sense because European countries are a lot smaller. So, you know, you can drive.
Kind of have to.
Yeah, you can drive like 5 hours over there and be in another country. You drive 5 hours in Kansas, you're still in Kansas.
Right, yeah.
So, but like, they had to learn like a minimum of like 3 or 4 languages. And, it's kind of like not that I want to say like everyone is xenophobic or racist or stuff like that, but like
No.
just when people do talk about like, well, why do you talk like that? Or when a conversation happens where I don't understand why I have to press 2 to like, if I want to speak Spanish, like everyone should just speak English. And I'm just like, but why? Why is it wrong to know more languages? Why is that something that's like frowned upon?
Yeah.
So I think like,
actually, we're not used to it. It's just not a value for us. You know?
like, because again, it makes, more sense in European countries for them to like, learn other languages. And yeah, it's not as like relevant for us to know it here in the US. Is it still a good skill to have? Yes, because one, it will make you more marketable. And two, like when you learn the language of any like language, you inherently do learn about the culture, because then you learn like just the way they use like masculine and feminine pronouns, or verb tenses and stuff like that. Like you inherently learn about that other culture, and so then you kind of learn that just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong. And I think that's another reason why we try to change everything to be like us, just to be like, they're not doing it the way I am. What they're doing is like, it's not really bad, but it's not right, so we just try to like push that onto other people.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I really missed out when I as a kid I just refused to learn Spanish because I just didn't think it was necessary.
It's like one of the biggest regrets of my life, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like because I took one semester of it and I got a C, and so like I was learning a lot. I wouldn't turn in homework. So I ended up dropping it and not taking it anymore because like I don't want it to hurt my GPA. And like now as an adult, I'm just like,
damn it,
you should have done it. Should have stuck with it, because you just get so much from it.
Yeah. But so what do you think about about the things that I was saying in terms of sexism and homophobia in the hip hop and the larger Black and Hispanic communities, and how that might have played or bled into Offset and or Cardi B? I really don't think either one of them is homophobic, especially because I know Cardi B's from the Bronx, and I know she must have been surrounded by drag queens and LGBT individuals just everywhere she goes, honestly. I don't know about Offset, but I'd like to believe that when she says her husband is not homophobic, that he really is not. So what do you think about what I had to say in terms of that? How does that
I think
settle with you?
I mean, yes, things are always getting better. Just if sometimes people just become complacent and then kind of I don't want to say this was like a mistake, but like an instance when this happens where someone says queer and then it gets taken like a wrong way. It's just kind of like it does speak a little bit to me, at least, and it's my personal opinion, like speak to a little bit of like lack of self-awareness or lack of awareness of the community that you're kind of speaking in, and how it's, and again, you can like go one way or the other. You could pinpoint every little thing, every microaggression, and be like, hey, is this okay, is this okay, is this not okay, and then just being like opposite and like, we've done our job, we're good, we can like do whatever, I'm confident in it. I think it's just constantly being aware. And do I still think there needs to be work in the hip-hop industry? I do. But do I think that change is happening? Yes. We'll definitely be seeing it a lot more, in the coming years. Even with, because I think even with, in terms of sexism, I think sexism has gone a lot better, more so in terms of like strong female rappers, or just like female members of the hip-hop community, I feel like are now seen more so in the light of being a strong woman, not just a like, oh look, it's a slut that's rapping, like that's cool. So in terms
their
of
own
like
people now,
they are their own people now,
their own label and their own
yeah. Well, I feel like kind of from the male side, they will still have in a lot of their videos, like the backup dancer chick with barely half a thong on. And,
yeah, that stuff is still present in like Cardi B's stuff. There's still a lot of kind of woman on woman competition, which is normal, I think, in some senses. Men will still talk about it in their songs, even if they're not rappers too, competition with other guys and bad friends and all that stuff. But I do think there's always going to be that presence of misogyny in even the women's songs, at least for now. You know? But I agree. I do think it's getting better, and I especially because Cardi B, an Afro-Hispanic rapper, can come out and defend against her black husband. He's not homophobic, and so when 10, 20 years ago, if he wasn't homophobic, it would have been flipped, it would have been like, of course he's homophobic. Like, we don't mess with queers, like it would have been so different. Like, she would not be defending that. She would probably be standing next to it if that's really what he was meaning to say at the time. And so, yeah, I think it is changing.
So we are on the right path.
Absolutely.
Just gotta keep us on that path.
Yes, that would be helpful. Well, any last comments or questions or anything you want to talk about?
Well, just thank you for allowing me to be on this show. It's been great.
Absolutely.
For future reference, be more careful of who I call trash.
Don't mess with Cardi.
Don't mess with Cardi. Can't do it.
I think I made a mistake. I am definitely passionate about Cardi B. I don't know what happened.
Hey, man.
But I love her. So, but thank you for coming on and talking to me about this. And I hope that you share this with everybody so they can listen to you to talk about things you love to talk about.
Yeah, definitely.
And I definitely had fun, and I hope people listening will have fun. And so,
shameless self-plug. Follow me on Instagram as Eli So Humble.
That's an amazing
oxymoron, but you don't question it. Snapchat is Eli So Fly with 2 Y's at the end because I'm cool. As much as I talk about Twitter, I'm not on there that much. But yeah, #love yourself, #you are worth it. And if you haven't showered or ate yet today, there is still time to do it. And you'll feel so much better for doing it because you are worth it.
Woohoo! So. Cool. Thank you, Eli. This has been CoalitionM on KFHS Radio. I'm your host, Carson Lopez. We'll see you guys next time.
Woo! I fucking love that shit. Yeah? That was so good.